Good afternoon. We're going to get started here. So good afternoon again. My name is Matt Chase. I'm the Executive Director of the National Association of Counties. I want to thank you for participating today on this briefing on payment in lieu of taxes. It's sponsored by NACo, the National Association of Counties, as well as the National Rural Counties and Schools Coalition. So we want to thank our partners, as well as I want to thank Senator Baldwin for helping us secure this room for this briefing. Today we're talking about the Payment in Lieu of Taxes program, which has been around since 1976. It's a program that's enjoyed widespread bipartisan support and bicameral support. And we really enjoy working across the aisle, across Capitol Hill, on an issue of great importance to county governments across the country. Payment in lieu of taxes, or we call it PILT, impacts 62% of the nation's counties. About 1,900 counties are impacted by federal public lands. It's often viewed as a Western issue, but we can show you from our maps and our data that it impacts just about every state in the country. In fact, 49 states across this country. In addition to the local residents that are impacted by federal public lands, we also are host to over 280 million visitors a year in some of these counties. We have counties as small as 3,000 people, 4,000 people, that can have up to 4 million visitors come through their borders each year. So this is a significant issue. What we're talking about when we talk about payment in lieu of taxes is that the federal government basically doesn't pay local property tax, and so counties forego their main source of revenue, which would be local property tax, and therefore PILT program helps compensate for the lost property tax revenue that counties would enjoy otherwise. I'm going to introduce Senator Bennett here in a second, but I want to talk a little bit about why counties matter and the services that we provide across this country. Counties actually predate the United States. We were formed in the early 1600s in the Williamsburg, Virginia area. The first 8 shires actually predate the country by over 150 years or 140 years. When we formed the country, counties were one of the first forms of government that were put in under state law and state constitution. The vast majority of our functions are codified into state constitutions and state law. We don't have a choice but to deliver these services. They are mandated services. But yet in many states, our revenue options are very limited. The state legislatures and the governors have really tied our hands. And so we have to deliver these services, and yet our revenue options are pretty limited. When we start talking about why counties matter, we want to really be clear of the role that we play in American society for quality of life, business, and for other things. When we talk about transportation, county governments own 45% of the road miles in America. We own 39% of bridges, 240,000 plus bridges, a third of the airports, and a third of the transit systems. When we talk about justice and public safety, a key role of county government, we staff the county jails. In Washington, we talk a lot about state prison reform, for example. State prisons have about 1.5 million prisoners at any one time. County jails host 13 million individuals a year. You can't go to state prison until you go to county jail first. Huge responsibilities in the law enforcement, in the courts, and in the general public safety arena. When we talk about PILT and public lands, public safety is key with search and rescue, 911, general law enforcement, and a host of other services. In the healthcare arena, county governments spend about $70 billion a year on healthcare for their citizens. A key role is public health. When we look at some of the diseases that are occurring in Africa and other places, the CDC is the ground control for the federal government, but CDC relies on public health departments at the county level to protect our local citizens. So we have huge responsibilities, whether it's transportation, healthcare, public safety, and of course our overall public administration responsibilities. When we talk about public lands again, we're talking about over 62% of counties, 1,900 out of our 3,069. Public lands cover 28% of the United States, so a significant portion. When you get west of the Mississippi, it's about 1 out of every 2 acres, so significant. Our message today is clear. We're asking the Congress to work in a bipartisan, bicameral fashion to secure 2015 payment in lieu of taxes funding as part of the next appropriations bill or any final bill that moves through Congress in the lame duck or even before, because we need certainty. Counties have to budget year in, year out, and yet they're often having to make difficult decisions. Do we pass our budget with PILT payments or without? And you'll hear later from our county manager and our elected official about what that does at the local level. And when we talk about cutting staff, what we're talking about is cutting sheriffs, we're talking about cutting judges, we're talking about cutting public health officials, we're talking about cutting public roads crews and those types of professions. So we're very pleased to be joined by Senator Bennett, key member of the Senate Finance Committee, who's going to talk a little bit about his perspective on PILT, and then we'll move through the agenda. Senator, thank you again.
Thanks. Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you, and I'm joined by my colleague John Walsh from Montana, and I know you're going to have others too in bipartisan conversation today. You know, a lot of times when I'm at home, people want to know why this place is so screwed up, and it is really screwed up. It is as bad as it looks from where you sit. And I want to say to the county commissioners that are here and the other county officials that are here, that the recipe for fixing it is actually fairly straightforward, and that is that if we held our officials in Washington, elected officials, accountable to the same standard we hold our local elected officials accountable, we wouldn't have the problems that we're having. Because I don't know one county commissioner in Colorado, whether a Republican, Democrat, or Tea Party, or anybody else, who would shut down the government for politics at the local level. Because we got to deliver these services every single day, and we don't have time to waste. And so it came not as a surprise to me, but it was disappointing when PILT was left out of an agreed upon budget between the leadership of the House and the Senate last year, and we had to fight to remind people why it's so important. And ultimately we were able to get it into the Farm Bill, which is not the natural place for it to be, but that's where it wound up. But it was only for 1 year. And that's why it's so important that you're here, because you got to educate. It is true that it affects counties all over the United States of America, but it profoundly affects counties in the West. And I think we have a big education process ahead of us to make sure people on the East Coast understand, and in between, on this side of the Mississippi, why this is so critical to our local governments and why it's the fair thing to do, because we're talking about land that we can't collect property taxes from. So Chairman Wyden is working to figure out whether there's something we can do with PILT and with school funding and the Land and Water Conservation Fund to see whether we can take care of this all at once. But I want you to know this is going to be a bipartisan effort. I see Mike Lee from Utah is here, Mark Udall from Colorado, my senior senator is here. This is something that we're all going to put our shoulder behind, but we really, really, really need your help. And I want to thank NACo in particular for your leadership here, and just offer my office, and I'm sure the offices of my colleagues, to say we'll do absolutely everything we can do, not just make sure that's in 15, but to find a permanent solution for this funding. So with that, I'm going to get out of your way. Should I just turn it over? Turn it over to John Walsh, the great senator from the great state of Montana. Thanks, everyone, for being here.
Thanks, Senator Bennett, for the introduction, and thank all of you for what you do each and every day to make our communities around the United States such great places to live. You know, as I was out on the campaign trail, traveling around the state of Montana, I had the opportunity to see the work that our commissioners in the state of Montana do each and every day. So I want to thank them for that, and I want to thank all of you, because I know that same type of work is happening around the United States. You know, prior to becoming a United States Senator, I served as Montana's Lieutenant Governor. And so I know the impact and how important it is to have predictability and the resources to do your job. And by just giving you the resources 2 or 3 months in advance is very difficult. And so we shouldn't expect our leaders at the local level to do that. So again, thanks for the invitation to speak on this important issue. You know, I know that in America, we value our public lands. But we also recognize the unique challenges of managing land owned by everyone. For almost 40 years, Congress has kept its commitment to rural America to assist local communities surrounded by non-taxable federal lands. PILT, as well as its sister programs like Secure Rural Schools and Refuge Revenue Sharing, provide critical payments to local governments, and I know that you all know that. As everyone here knows, These critical payments allow counties to continue to keep our kids in school, plow our roads, protect our families, and pick up our trash. Unfortunately, Congress has recently been making these payments late. These disruptions create tremendous uncertainty and limit the ability of our commissioners to balance their budgets. So we appreciate the work that you're doing based on this fact. Counties deserve predictable and fair payments when it comes to federal government meeting its obligations. That is why I've introduced the Fair Share Act. I did that this summer, and my bill will consolidate 3 major payment programs: PILT, SRS, and the Refuge Sharing Program that the federal government uses to pay counties for land ownership and management. It streamlines the formula used to calculate the payment for each county and ensures that rural counties receive an adequate share of the payments as well. But most importantly, this legislation will provide full, permanent, and mandatory funding for these programs under an expanded PILT program. I want to thank my commissioners from Montana who are here, who worked closely with my staff and I to put this bill together in seeking a long-term solution, because we know that we can't continue to go on year in and year out, just 6 months at a time or a year at a time. I also strongly support passing a temporary extension of the payment programs in order to provide continued funding while the Senate considers my bill and other long-term solutions. We want to find a solution to this problem. We know it's going to take time, so it's important that we provide short-term funding. I also want to thank Chairman Wyden in particular, who deserves credit for his hard work to keep his counties whole and provide long-term solutions for the whole nation. So we know that Chairman Wyden is working on behalf of our cities and counties, and will continue to do that from his position, because we know that working together and across the aisle, we can accomplish some great things. We just need to make sure that we're doing it. So please keep the pressure on us to do this. Talk to your representatives, your senators, about how important it is to have long-term solutions. Let them know what's at stake as they travel around to your communities and talk. So with that, thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Senator, for those remarks. At this point, we're pleased to be joined by Senator Mike Lee of Utah, a key member of the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources. Senator?
It's great to be with you. It's especially nice to see Commissioner Topham from Sevier County, Utah, and Commissioner Gardner from Washington County. Like so many of you, I feel like PILT is an exceptionally important and yet too little understood program. This is not an entitlement. This is not a handout. It's not an earmark. This is not something that the government ought to attach as an incidental benefit to something else. This is an affirmative obligation of the federal government that goes along with the fact that the federal government, number one, owns a disproportionate share of land in some states of the Union, and in particular in some counties. And number two, the federal government's ownership of that land imposes certain very significant burdens on you. Number one, because of the fact that you're prohibited from collecting taxes on that land, and there are, of course, additional restrictions that go along with federal public land, notwithstanding it being designated as set aside for multiple use. Sometimes the uses are not that multiple. As a result of all of this, you as counties, most of you, end up losing a lot of money. Now, when you look at PILT, you find that most counties actually receive pennies on the dollar compared to what they could receive and would receive if they were somehow allowed to collect taxes on that land, even at the lowest possible rate, even at the Greenbelt rate. And as a result of this, it's very difficult for many counties to provide basic services to their citizenry. Services like search and rescue, fire, security, education, and so forth. This is a big problem, especially because of the fact that most of the federal public land in the United States is located in the western United States. It's disproportionately burdened. A lot of people are quick to point out, look, our public lands, our federal public lands, provide benefits to all Americans. That's undoubtedly true. But that being the case, the burdens associated with that federal public land should not be disproportionately paid by some people in some counties of some states. Especially when you consider the fact that in some counties, in particular some of the smaller counties in states like mine, and in states like my friend and my second cousin, Senator Udall from Colorado, a lot of these counties collect a very substantial portion of the revenue that they use that goes into their budgets every year from PILT. It's for that exact reason why we can't allow this to be used as a political football. It's exactly for that reason why we can't allow it to be designated as something that is like unto an entitlement or a carve-out or an earmark or something like that. It's not that. It is an affirmative obligation that needs to stand on its own, and it shouldn't be attached to other things. We've got to shore up the funding. We've got to continue to evaluate how we provide this funding, how we calculate it. And if it truly is intended to be a payment in lieu of taxes, it's my view that it ought to, in some ways, roughly approximate or somehow resemble the amount of revenue a taxing jurisdiction would receive if it could, in fact, collect those taxes. We live in a great country, and we're great in part because we've been blessed with extraordinary land. Our federal land is a great resource that the American people have. We've got to make sure that those who live closest to it, closest to where it's concentrated to the greatest degree, aren't punished disproportionately merely by virtue of their proximity to those lands. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. I think you just wrote our talking points for us and said it as eloquently as we could talk about it ourselves. So thank you again, Senator Lee. At this point, I'm pleased to introduce Senator Mark Udall of Colorado, again, a key member of the Senate Committee on Energy and Natural Resources.
Thank you. I didn't know whether Senator Lee would acknowledge that I'm a member of his family. His grandfather was my grandmother's brother, and so the Lees run deep in the Udall family. And on this particular topic, Senator Lee and I couldn't be closer. On other topics, sometimes he and I have a set of differences, but we are family, as I think in the end we're all part of the broader American family. I get a little bit idealistic when I think about rural America, and particularly the areas that you all represent in this context. Thomas Jefferson, who I look to for a lot of inspiration, and whose political party, by the way, was the Democratic Republicans, if you all knew that. He certainly took a lot of his insight and a lot of the principles that are enshrined in the Declaration of Independence, and then, of course, the Constitution from agrarian America and the values that are rooted in agrarian rural America. Small town spirit, self-government, sitting in judgment of a fellow citizen if you're on a jury, you name it. Much of that grew out of the agrarian experiences and the rural experiences of Americans and previously in the UK. So I take my responsibility to rural Colorado and to other rural areas of the country very, very seriously. I'd be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to Colorado, and I know we've got two commissioners here, Commissioner John Martin from Garfield County and then Commissioner Lynn Padgett from Ouray County, and great to see both of you. I did want to brag briefly, if I could, about PILT in the context of those two counties. You all know that PILT provided funding for about 1,900 counties. As Senator Lee and others have said, it makes up for diminished tax revenues. Ouray County, it's in southwestern Colorado. You have to visit if you like mountains, if you like hot springs, if you're an angler, if you're a hunter, if you're a mountain biker, if you just like to enjoy the low humidity, clean air of the mountain states, you got to come to Ouray County. It's a challenge, though, living in Ouray County. And when the economic downturn came, the county's receipts, I think, Lynn, dropped 36% on the property tax front. And the county had to cut back to 4 days a week of staff operations. And without PILT, those essential services would have been hit even harder. The Sheriff's Department was looking at reduced hours and reduced functions, and that's just not how you maintain safety. So Ouray County has benefited from the PILT monies that we've been able to direct into that county. Garfield County, John, I think the numbers I have here are accurate. This summer, after we were able to include PILT in the Farm Bill, I think $3 million additional dollars came to Garfield County. That's 10% of your budget. And I know that you support your county workers and the county services and the other responsibilities you have. I know that it's always a balancing act. How do you do more with less? Or or how do you do more, in some cases with more. But I hear over and over again in Colorado the importance of PILT. And again, I want to pay tribute to all of you and what you do to maintain a very high quality of life in those counties. We got PILT extended through the Farm Bill last year, but that was just on a one-time basis. So our mission, and I think that's why you all are here, is to get it extended permanently and not have to have this fight year in and year out. And I'm confident we can do that. I know you're here to make sure that your voices are heard and that you're putting a marker on the table. And I want to tell you what I think the strategy is. There are two other really important programs that buttress and amplify and support PILT. One of them is Secure Rural Schools. The other is the LWCF program, Land and Water Conservation Fund. And right now, there's underway the creation of a strategy that will put together what I think is a triple threat. Those three programs buttressing each other and being permanently extended together. And that coalition will be a really powerful one. It will be a Democratic and Republican coalition, a rural and urban coalition, a western state and an eastern state coalition. So I'm asking you all to take a look at those proposals and help us build this coalition even larger. I think many of you are aware of Secure Rural Schools and how that functions, but I wanted to just end by talking about LWCF, the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It was created 50 years ago, and the idea was that we develop our oil and gas resources, we'll reinvest some of those proceeds into protecting our finite natural resources with an emphasis on recreation and public lands. And we've learned that for every dollar you spend through LWCF, you generate $4 of economic activity through activities like hunting and fishing, camping, skiing, biking, you name it. Just in Colorado, and Lynn and John, you know this, $13 billion in consumer spending that supports over 124,000 jobs in our recreation economy. So if you think about these three programs together, they interrelate, they're interfingered, and they help support our economy and our really special way of life. So my pitch to you all is that as we move forward, and you're back here making the case, I believe, in November, and hopefully we're going to get the job done then, that you think about this triple threat concept that will build a coalition that will ensure that PILT's fully funded permanently, that Secure Rural Schools is likewise fully funded permanently, and LWCF has that same status. That's how we'll get this done. Thanks for your leadership. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you, Senator Udall. The National Association of Counties and our member counties are certainly looking at those proposals. And we also want to be clear that the three programs have very separate, distinct purposes. That payment in lieu of taxes is about foregoing tax revenue. Secure Rural Schools is dealing with timber impacted, and of course conservation. They all do blend together, but with very unique missions. At this point, we're going to go across the other side of the Capitol and hear from Congressman Chris Stewart, a member of the House Appropriations Committee and a member of the Subcommittee on Interior. The PILT program is very unique in the sense that we cross Finance Committee, the authorization committees, as well as appropriations as our vehicle sometimes. So at this point, I am pleased to introduce Congressman Chris Stewart.
What, no standing ovation?
Yeah, no, come on.
Thank you, that was very kind of you.
There goes Walter Cronkite.
I'm a little intimidated by this because I'm just a congressman. And we didn't expect, cameras and stuff because they don't usually follow guys like me around. It's good to see some of my friends from Utah here, including Tommy, some of the members of the press from Utah. And look, what could I say after the time that you've spent, and you all are experts on this anyway. There's nothing I'm going to say here in the 4 or 5 minutes that I have that you're going to go, wow, I didn't think of that. So let me start out by stating the obvious, and that is I am a friend to you on this. And I can say this, and I think some people do sometimes, and they say it insincerely, or they say it because they think it's to their benefit. But I can say this to you with absolute honesty. You don't have anyone who's worked harder for you to pass and to solidify PILT than I have in the United States Congress on the House of Representatives side. Part of that is because of my committee assignment. It's a focal point for it. But part of it is, and I want to make this point if I could, before I make a point, I'm going to back up a little bit and ask you, how many of you represent districts with, say, more than 50% of your county is federally owned? Okay, pretty good number of you. I won't go 60, 70, I'll jump ahead. How many of you have counties that are more than 80% federally controlled? A few of you. 90%? Well, there are some. And there's some in my district in Utah. There's a couple counties in my district, 97% controlled by the federal government. I mean, you could tax that, the private property at 100% and still not have the revenue necessary for emergency services, for roads, for all of the requirements that in just a minimal way are necessary to run a county or to run a small city or a small town. And there is this moral argument that is so critical to this conversation, and that is, how can you justify when the federal government is controlling enormous swaths of Western lands, primarily this being a Western issue, leaving those leaders so little option as to how they're going to finance and fund just the basic services for the people in those counties, and not recognize that we're paying them pennies on the dollar for PILT anyway, and not recognize that this shouldn't be an uncertain future. And how many times, and I won't ask you individually, but I can, how many times did last winter I spend on the phone with commissioners in my state who were wondering, what in the world's happening with PILT? We're trying to do a budget, and we don't know whether we're going to receive this money. Are we going to receive some of it? Are we going to receive any of it? And already the phone calls have started. What's going to happen with PILT this year, because it wasn't in the CR? But it will be in the omnibus. I assure you of that. It will be in the omnibus. And part of the reason is because, as the senator just said, there's bipartisan support for this. This doesn't cut across party lines. This isn't a Republican issue. It might be slightly more Republican just because the demographics, you know, a larger majority of these counties are in Republican states or Republican districts. But Senator Reid is interested in this. Some of the senators from California are interested in this as well, as are, of course, many of the Republican counterparts. I would maybe end with this last thought. You all know the numbers. And we could go through those, and I could impress you with how wise I am as, you know, we review those for you. But, you know, 410, I think, something like that. My expectation is that we won't see meaningful reductions in that. In fact, I don't think we'll see any reductions in that number. There just isn't a political force that says this is not money well spent, let's cut it. Quite the opposite. I think that there's a fairly broad consensus. But once again, this is money that's absolutely essential, that it's completely unfair, even as it stands, to take this land and then reduce the tax base and then make the counties come beg for it anyway. And I would do everything that I can to put this on a more permanent funding so that we don't go year to year, so that these leaders who have a very difficult job in these counties anyway have to wonder, well, okay, so we begged and scratched and cajoled and we got our PILT funding this year. Are we going to get it next year? And let's start the process all over again. If we could get this on a 5-year projection, that would certainly be my hope and my intention and something that I would work for. Thank you for giving me a few minutes to speak to you today. I hope you know that we're with you in this fight. I think ultimately the bigger answer for me, and I know that this is a more partisan statement. This doesn't have consensus across party lines. I think ultimately the answer to this is to return as much of these federal lands to state control anyway. And if we do that, then, and allow the people in the local communities and the people in the state to make some of these decisions, everyone's benefited by that. That would certainly be my hope as well, as that would reflect the desires of most of the people that I represent. Until that time, we'll continue to work as we can to bring some certainty and some assurance to this program. So thank you for the few minutes we've spent with you. God bless you all for your work. Thank you.
before the congressman runs off, again, I just want to thank him, the chairman, Hal Rogers of the House Appropriations Committee, as well as Congressman Culvert, the subcommittee chair, for putting PILT into the Interior Appropriations Bill for fiscal year 2015. That gives us more options for this short-term crisis to try and get PILT into some vehicle before Congress adjourns this year so that counties can have some certainty. So by the subcommittee taking that action, it certainly has put us in a better position to take care of this year. So I want to thank you personally on behalf of the National Association of Counties and the National Rural Counties and Schools Coalition. So thank you. At this time, we're honored to be joined by the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee, Senator Ron Wyden from Oregon, who's certainly been a leader on payment in lieu of taxes as well as secure rural schools and many other issues. And he is certainly working hard trying to find a pathway forward for us. So, Senator Wyden, Chairman Wyden, thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And it would be cruel and unusual punishment to give you a filibuster, because I know you've had a number of members in, and let me be brief. I think you know that I felt, and the Congress has felt, that PILT is just a lifeline to scores and scores of rural counties. And what we have really been trying to do ever since 1998, when I wrote the Secure Rural Schools legislation, is to try to find ways to maximize our clout in order to get resources to rural communities. So for a number of years, we linked Secure Rural Schools and PILT together, and we saw last year, for the first time, PILT wasn't funded in the yearly appropriations bill, and of course, we had rural communities up in arms all over the country. We were able to get help in the Farm Bill. I think Senator Stabenow, for example, and others deserve credit for it. And what we're trying to do now is to see if we can get our rural communities and all of you as key elected officials to see if you can get off the roller coaster. So I am working on two bills, and the first would not just fully fund PILT, Secure Rural Schools, and LWCF. That's number one, because we've got to do that for 1 year. But the second bill would authorize permanent, mandatory funding of PILT, Secure Rural Schools, and the Land and Water Conservation Fund. And the reason I'm doing this is not only do I think this is right, but it builds on what has been successful for us in the past, which is to build the broadest possible coalition. I know when I came to the Senate and I proposed the Secure Rural Schools bill, I was a young senator, full head of hair and rugged good looks, and nobody had any idea who I was. And we started working with all of you, building that kind of a coalition. And what I want to do is get rural communities off this roller coaster. And I think there is a coalition to be built in the country. I think there's a coalition to be built in the Congress to link PILT, Secure Rural Schools, and the Water Conservation Fund permanently. Our proposal will have mandatory 150% of funding at that level, so that when you come here in the future, you can be talking, hopefully, about a variety of other issues that are pressing for you as counties. So thank you for the terrific work that you all have done on these issues for a lot of years. We would not be in this position if it hadn't been for all the sweat equity that rural counties have put into this cause. And I think we are on the cusp, like we were in 1998 when we started with Secure Rural Schools, of building a political coalition that spans the country, that spans the political spectrum, both political parties, brings together economic development, protecting our treasures, and particularly ensuring that rural communities can prosper in the years ahead. So thanks for having me. Thanks for the good work. I look forward to continuing the partnership. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's clearly important to our efforts to have the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee as the tip of the spear and pushing forward. So we want to thank him for his leadership, and we're really looking forward to working with you on a long-term solution as well as short-term. So thank you again. At this time, we're pleased to be joined by Representative Ann Kirkpatrick of Arizona, who has come across the Hill to join us today. Thank you, Congresswoman. We appreciate your time. See you.
Thank you. Welcome back, everyone. I know most of you have probably been here numerous times advocating for your counties. I'm Ann Kirkpatrick, and I represent the eastern half of Arizona, one of the largest congressional districts in the country that's not a whole state like Alaska or Montana or Wyoming. It's 60,000 square miles, 80-plus small towns. We've got ranching, farming, copper mines, national parks. I have the Grand Canyon. 95% of the land in my district is public land, either state or federal. So you know what a strain that puts on our county budgets. Arizona has 15 counties. In my district, I have 11, all or part of 11 of those 15 counties. And PILT and secure rural schools are critically important to us. So last year we were concerned when we didn't get that funding in the budget. And we thankfully were able to get help from our senators to get it in the Farm Bill. But it left us really with some uncertainty that's not fair to our smaller towns and our counties who are struggling. They've had in Arizona, their funds cut at the state level, and then not knowing at the federal level where to go next. So I want to point out a couple of key people who are here. Liz Archuleta, who's our wonderful member of the Board of Supervisors in Coconino County, and you're going to hear from her. And then I'm accompanied by my husband, Roger, and my Ledge Director, Ken Montoya. So I just want to say that, PILT funds our firefighters, our law enforcement, infrastructure, roads, and we really need to have the stability and security of knowing that we're going to have that funding year after year. So I've introduced legislation to make it permanent so we don't go through the uncertainty that we did last year when we were negotiating the budget. So I hope you'll join me in that effort. We should have permanent funding for PILT and secure rural schools. That's a top priority for me, and I will continue to fight for that. So thank you all very much, and thanks for your advocacy.
Thank you again, Congresswoman, for that remarks. Sorry, we lost our mics with one of the senators. So they wanted to have the last word, I guess. So now we're going to move on to the local level, and you're going to hear from some local representatives of county government, both from the professional side as well as the elected side, for just a quick overview again of the Payment in Lieu of Taxes program and the impact that this has on the ground every day for our residents, our visitors, our businesses, and just our overall communities. So at this point, I'm pleased to introduce Supervisor Liz Archuleta from Coconino County, the Flagstaff area, as well as the Grand Canyon, significant national park, but also has a number of other federal public lands. So Supervisor Archuleta.
Well, thank you very much, Matt, and thank you all for taking the time today to join us. I know you have a lot of responsibilities and demands on your time, so the fact that you're making this a priority is very much appreciated. I'd also like to thank my Congresswoman Ann Kirkpatrick for her voice on this issue and being here today. In this portion of the briefing, we'll cover just payment in lieu of taxes and how counties like mine depend on it to provide the vital programs and services to our residents. For a little background on my county and on counties in Arizona, I want to let you know that Coconino County is in northern Arizona. It's the home to Grand Canyon National Park. Our county is the second largest county in the nation. We have over 18,000 square miles. Coconino County is a county which only has 13% private land. This means that 87% of the land within my county is not taxable. Not unlike other counties, more than half of our general fund is spent on criminal justice, including courts, law enforcement, and prosecution. The situation in Arizona's 15 counties is not unlike my county. Almost half of our counties have more than 50% federal land. An example is Gila County has 96% of public land, leaving the burden to 4% of its land mass to pay the taxes. One county in Arizona, Graham County, they would lose 13% of their general fund budget if PILT funding is lost. Another county, Yuma County, would be forced to lay off 70 employees if they don't get PILT funding. And Apache County, the property tax rate would have to increase 69% to make up for the elimination of PILT. And they would not be able to do that because the state legislature has capped counties' property taxes. So even if they would try to make that up, they wouldn't be able to. So I'm going to go to a little bit of did you know? So did you know that more than a quarter of all the land, 28%, in the United States is owned by the federal government? This is public land, and it is exempt from local property taxes. And it's not just my county. 62% of all counties have federal lands within their boundaries. In fact, some county jurisdictions include as much as 90% or more federal lands, impacting them disproportionately. And earlier I mentioned Gila County in Arizona with 96%. So what does PILT matter? Why does it matter to counties and to county services? Why are these services critical? Well, the Payment in Lieu of Taxes program provides payments to counties and other local governments to offset restricted tax revenues due to the presence of federal lands in their jurisdictions. While PILT payments are pennies on the dollar, they provide counties like mine the ability to provide vital services and programs to constituents and visitors. In fact, more than 280 million people visit America's national parks and federal public lands each year. And as I mentioned, in my county, we have the Grand Canyon. And there are people from all over the United States, as well as international visitors, that come to my county to enjoy the beauty of the Grand Canyon. So what kind of services are we talking about? Well, I'm talking about services that are absolutely essential. Search and rescue. A lot of these lands that we're talking about are vast and they're remote. And when we have visitors coming to enjoy them and utilizing them, we hear stories about visitors getting lost. We hear stories about when they go down to the Grand Canyon and they're just going to go for a little 5-minute walk. That ends up being a 5-hour walk without any water. And we have to deploy search and rescue to go and find them, and sometimes to recover them. And you know what? It's not cheap to launch these types of services. A search and rescue team costs a lot of money in equipment and personnel. Another service, fire management. Wildland fires plague these federal lands, and our counties are an integral part of prevention, mitigation, and relief efforts. In my county, just in 2010, we had the largest forest fire, the Schultz Fire. And then after that, we had flooding as a result of that forest fire. And we continue to have to pay for that. In 2010 alone, we spent $150 million on that one incident. Emergency medical services. I hope I said $150 million, not 150,000, an M, 150 million on that one incident alone. Emergency medical services is another area. We have to protect the health of our residents and visitors, and this is not as simple as it may seem. It could be, maybe a short ambulance ride to the ER, but when you have people who lived in vast areas with a lot of land mass, it's very expensive. It's not that short ambulance ride. Law enforcement. The safety of our residents and visitors are of the utmost concern, and it's complicated by the vast spaces that I'm talking about, and it's challenging because it's on terrain that's not flat terrain, and we have limited local resources. And then solid waste. Who wants to talk about trash? Well, this is an essential service. Someone has to take out our nation's trash, and most often than not, it's the counties that manage this important issue. So as you can see, PILT is one of the key ways that the federal government fulfills its obligation to contribute something towards basic public services in counties where the federal government is the major landowner. But PILT is not only for the benefit of local counties, it also enables us to ensure that every American who visits their public lands can enjoy a safe and healthy environment. So now I'd like to turn over the podium to my colleague, Greg Kable. Greg?
Good afternoon. My name is Greg Kable. I am the county manager in Graham County, North Carolina, located in the far western tip in the Smoky Mountains. We very much appreciate senators and the congressmen's offices and you all for being here to discuss and to hear about a very necessary and needful program in counties across the United States. In the course of what we want to discuss here today, I want to give you kind of a quick overview of the PILT program and what we're going to be asking Congress to do over the next few weeks. First, I'll give you a little bit of an idea of Graham County. Unlike western counties, a lot of the counties in the east are smaller in size. Graham County is about 303 square miles. Very, very different from the 18,000 square miles that you see in Arizona. Population there is about a little over 8,000 residents. Federal land ownership is at 64%. Total exempt land ownership is at 67%. Next door, Swain County, they're at 87% federal ownership. Most of our lands are tied up and controlled by federal entities. And the PILT program provides monies so that we can maintain necessary services. Since being signed into law in 1976, the PILT payments were limited to discretionary amounts appropriated by Congress. During the first decade of the program, PILT was appropriated annually at around $100 million. In 1994, the PILT Reform Act tied authorization levels to the Consumer Price Index, which is why you see the graph levels here start to diverge. It was not until 2008 that PILT was made a fully funded and mandatory program instead of discretionary, and therefore fully funding the program from 2008 through 2012. As you heard earlier, approximately 1,900 counties have federal land within their jurisdiction, and this map shows the breakdown of those PILT payments within each jurisdiction. In 2013, PILT funding was tied to map 21, which was the Transportation Reauthorization Bill, whenever it expired from 2012. And earlier this year, fortunately, they were able to tie PILT payments to the Farm Bill at $425 million. In June of this year, counties received their fiscal year 2014 PILT payments. And as of right now, there's no clear path forward to ensure that we receive any funding whatsoever for 2015. Because so far through the appropriations process, the House Interior, Environment and Related Agencies Appropriations Bill did not include the $442 million PILT, and the Senate Appropriations did not include any funding either. It's very needful and important to understand that counties and parishes and you know, all across this nation, we rely on PILT funding to be able to provide these essential services to each of our respective communities. Not only that, the federal agencies that operate within our borders, within our counties and jurisdictions, rely on us receiving this money to be able to provide services to them as well. I looked up our sheriff numbers the other day. My sheriff's department spends about 250 to 300 man-hours per month on federal lands. That's not including EMS response. Graham County is a very rugged terrain in the western part of the state there. We spend a lot of time, and the federal agencies are our neighbors and our friends, and we like to work together. But it's important that these funds come down from the federal level so that we can maintain those services as explained by Ms. Archuleta. In the end, we have a call to action. And the American people in our nation's counties are counting on your leadership to help ensure these vital programs and services continue uninterrupted for fiscal year 2015. We need your help. We must find a predictable, stable funding solution for PILT that is not subject to the yearly appropriations to allow counties to budget for these critical programs and services long term. Thank you very much.
Before we wrap up and take any questions, again, I want to thank all the senators and House members for participating. I want to thank all the county elected officials for attending, and also reiterate our ask, and that is for short-term funding in the fiscal year 2015 appropriations bill. We're pleased that Congresswoman Herrera Butler from Washington and Congressman Joe Garcia from Florida are circulating a Dear Colleague letter starting today to call for full funding for payment in lieu of taxes in secure rural schools, which is really key to both the National Association of Counties and our partners at the National Rural Counties and Schools Coalition. We're also looking for that long-term fix so that we don't have to come back every year and have this conversation, and so that our county elected officials can budget and provide services. I hope it's clear through the stories that you've heard and through the presentation that what counties are doing is helping with the fundamental building blocks for healthy, safe, vibrant communities. These are things that people take for granted until they're no longer there. You just immediately assume when you call 911, someone's going to be on the other end of the phone. What happens if you're out hiking, you call 911 and you get an answering machine because a county went from 40 hours a week to 32 hours a week or 20 hours a week? You'd be a pretty disappointed hiker if you couldn't get a live person on the end of the phone when you called 911. And the same thing goes with public health, transportation, law enforcement, and the other things that we talked about today. So I want to thank you all for your time. We do have a couple of minutes for questions and comments if anybody would like to ask any questions. All right, thank you again.